Hey everyone, today we're going to go over a concept I don't think that's covered in the AP Micro and AP Macro curriculum, but it's a rather interesting concept and it's quite relevant to some of the things that you're learning about actually, that we're learning about. So, it's the Laffer curve. The Laffer curve was a diagram that was constructed by the American economist Arthur Laffer, who lived during, I think, Reagan's era. He was one of the most influential economics at that time. And he argued, I think he's a supply side economist, and he argued that increasing tax rate is effective, does rake in more tax revenue from the government to redistribute income, to spend money on public education or public health care or public transportation, but not beyond a certain point, a point of maximum efficiency. And he used this graph to illustrate his argument. So if you take a look at this graph right here, you'll see that there are two main regions, the blue and the red regions, right? And the blue region is where increasing tax rate will increase tax revenue. And you can see how the slope starts to flatten out, right? And beyond this point, the slope will actually be negative, which means that tax revenue is actually not maximized because marginal tax revenue will now be negative. Yeah. So that's to do with diminishing marginal utility, right? It's kind of relevant to that concept as well. But he argues that beyond this point, the government will actually bring less revenue than they did before. And this is all hypothetical, like these numbers are hypothetical because this is just a model. But this model illustrates the argument pretty well. And there are three primary reasons for this certain shape, right? Because if tax revenue doesn't go down, then it would just be a linear line. It would just be like that, right? The three reasons are, number one, it disincentivizes work. The best entrepreneurs, the best engineers, the best software developers, they would just stop working if 70% of their income is going to get taxed anyway, because the rich, they have a lot more flexibility than those that are not as financially stable, right? That are not as wealthy. So they can just not work, and that will lead to decreased tax revenue for the government, especially for countries like the United States, where a large chunk of the government's tax revenue comes from the rich due to its progressive tax bracket. And number two, immigration. So for large cities like Shanghai, large global cities where some of the most innovative minds, some of the most entrepreneurial minds are located, these people will simply emigrate to another country if the tax rate is way too high. And the third reason is just tax avoidance and tax immigration. Companies will eventually find ways to get around the system. They'll find ways to circumnavigate the tax policy set upon them, whether that be through a philanthropy or aligning some of their company values with some of the ESG standards that were put forth by the government or by certain organizations. They will find ways to evade taxes. So what we need to find, if we're policymakers, is what that point is, right? What that tax rate is to maximize tax revenue. Unfortunately, there are too many confounding variables that come into play, so we'll never actually know what the most effective and the most efficient tax rate would be. So that's that. I hope you guys understood this concept, and I will see you next time.